Polish is harder than you think. Today I'm going to teach you how to count. Then I'll explain how it's practically impossible to learn it properly. And if you start to struggle, remember, I'm only teaching the basics today. Let's start off by being optimistic. I'm a very average language learner, but I speak Polish quite well. It's disgustingly hard, but it's not actually impossible. However, at the end of this short lesson, you might disagree with me on that conclusion. Now I'm going to count to 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. There are a couple of things to say here. Firstly, Polish is a completely phonetic language, so reading these should be easy. But when I was a beginner, that was not my impression at all. In fact, even though my accent is quite good, I still have problems pronouncing these words. For some reason, pronouncing the numbers in Polish is really hard. Finally, until you're a real expert, you might think the words 3 and 4, 3, 4, sound very similar, and 9 and 10, 9, 10, really are incredibly similar. Of course, 13 and 30 sound very similar in English, so maybe I'm exaggerating about how difficult Polish numbers are. Bear with me. I'm going to ignore 1 for a moment, since it's actually the most difficult number. Anyway, they usually don't even say it. When they count to 3, Poles normally say raz, dwa, trzy, with raz meaning one time. 2 is complicated enough to start with. How do you say 2 apples in Polish? 2 jabłka. 2 telephones, 2 telefony. I'm going to talk about how bizarre Polish gender is in another video, but let's take something feminine, like 2 lamps. That's 2 lampy. For feminine words, 2 has a different ending. Why? Naturally, there's no answer. 3 doesn't change for feminine words, nor does 4, 5, or 6. It's only 2. I ask again, why? And of course, no Polish person ever has an explanation. But that's not the worst of it. There are not many words like this, but definitely children behave strangely in Polish. It's a neuter word, so we should use dwa, just like I did with apples above, because jabłko is neuter too. But dwa dzieci is just wrong, and you have to say dwoje dzieci. Dwoje means something like a duality, and for some reason, that's the only way they count children. In this case, it's not only 2. They have troje dzieci, czworo, who knows why, but 4 loses its T in this form, 5, and all the way to 10, and on and on. Children are not the only case where this happens. Polish grammar has a weird obsession with men. So instead of 2, 3, 4 mężczyźni, we're supposed to say dwaj, trzej, czterej. It's the same with any man, a fireman, a male student, a boxer. They all use these forms. Except they don't. The second you learn how to say dwaj, the first Polish person you say it to will tell you that they don't say it like that. But to explain why, I have to tell you something much more terrible. Basically, Polish has more or less normal numbers from 1 to 4. Anything higher than 5 simply breaks the Polish grammatical system. I promised to make another video about the Polish case system. I can't talk about everything in one video. But for now, you need to know that Polish has declensions. If for one moment we could pretend that these were regular, predictable, and logical, I could tell you that knowing a noun's case tells you what role it plays in the sentence. So, student is doing something, but studentowi is receiving something, etc., etc. The 2 that you need to know now are actually the only 2 cases that exist in full in English, the nominative and the genitive. The nominative is the one you see in the dictionary and looks very normal and easy, sometimes even in Polish. And the genitive is when something belongs to somebody. So instead of saying, this is John, I say, this is John's car. The S on the end makes it the genitive in English. Obviously, it's much more complicated in Polish, as sometimes you add an A, Jan, Jana, sometimes a U, stół, stołu, sometimes a Y, kobieta, kobiety, and sometimes ów, and sometimes, instead of adding an A, you take the A off the end of the word. Kobiety, kobiet. Obviously this is hard, and sometimes you have to use numbers in different cases. That's really, really advanced. Today I'm only teaching the basics, but somehow, Polish thinks you need the genitive even when using the most basic forms, but only when you have 5 or more of something. Watch me count telephones. Jeden telefon, dwa telefony, trzy telefony, cztery telefony, pięć telefonów. Why does the ending change from 5? Well, Polish people will tell you it's the genitive. But why is it the genitive? Why isn't it pięć telefony? Trust me, you will never get a good answer. It's completely nonsensical because, in fact, it's possible to really use the genitive with 5. They use the genitive in negative sentences. So there are not 5 telephones would be nie ma pięciu telefonów. That's the real genitive. Pięć becomes pięciu. When you count normally in Polish, the number 5 itself is in the nominative, the dictionary form. But the words after it are in the genitive for no reason whatsoever. As I said though, Polish has an obsession with men. One man is one man, and it's not very complicated. Jeden mężczyzna. But practically speaking, you cannot count men normally at all in Polish. Already from 2, they start to use the genitive. And this time, they're not playing around because they use the real genitive. Let's count firemen. Jeden strażak, dwóch strażaków, trzech strażaków, czterech strażaków, pięciu strażaków. Suddenly we have new numbers. All of them. Dwóch, trzech, czterech. And this time, pięć has its funny ending. And of course, so does 6 and every number after that. Sześciu, siedmiu, ośmiu. I'm sure there are good historical reasons for this, but it clearly demonstrates why so many people give up studying Polish so quickly. There are only 2 things left to discuss, and they're both horribly difficult. Finally, the strange dance between the nominative and the genitive. Forgetting Poland's obsession with masculinity, we know that 1, 2, 3, 4 tables are nominative. Jeden stół, dwa stoły, trzy stoły, cztery stoły. And then 5 tables are genitive. Pięć stołów. This stays the same for 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. In fact, all the way to 21. At 22 it stops and becomes nominative again. 22 stoły. The same for 23 and 24. And then it's back to the absurd use of the genitive. The same for 32, 42, and 10,352. Pay attention to this when you're talking about money. 2 złote, but 100 złotych. Imagine if in English you had to say 2 pounds, but 10 poundsów. Nobody would study English. The other thing, probably the worst thing, is the number 1. In English it's childishly easy. In Polish it's very, very hard. The reason is that most numbers behave like incredibly irregular nouns, but jeden is an adjective, of course an irregular one. This is Polish after all, so it changes for genders. Look, 1 man, 1 woman, 1 child. Jeden mężczyzna, jedna kobieta, jedno dziecko. Naturally, when you decide you're insane enough to study Polish declination, this will give you a massive headache. But we're not discussing cases today. So just one more thing. Polish likes to use 1 as a plural. Yes, they say something like ones to mean some. And because Polish has this obsession with men, there are 2 plural forms. So while some women is jedne kobiety, some firemen is jedni strażacy. Look, I love Polish and I enjoy sending my brain to the gym when I speak it, but really, Polish grammar is ridiculously tough. Ale wiecie, nie poddawajcie się. To piękny język i daje wam możliwość rozmawiać z fajnymi ludźmi. Na razie.